from the official point of view, we're excited to have Dave back again, and his book Little Theologians is something that is it that one that I heard is $110 in the so
just the hardcover one. The hardcover one is made for libraries. The paperback is priced well under that.
I think that's pretty exciting to say that you've got a book that's that expensive, but it is really, really fantastic, kind of delving into what it means for, all ages and for children in particular. And then this newest book, A Gospel for All Ages, Teaching and Preaching with the Whole Church, which is soon to be released kind of next year. I think it's going to be quite a key learning that comes into this conversation, because one of the biggest challenges we have is that people say, well, we can't, learn together and teach and preach across the ages. So I can't wait for people to really start chewing on that one. So can I just take this time to say thank you again, Dave. I know it's late at night for you, but you are committed to being here, and we just really look forward to what you've got to say today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I have always found that when I'm with Aussies and Kiwis, I'm in good company. I feel like there's something about being Commonwealth cousins that, even though I can drive to the US in half a day, it's a much different context than it is to be with all of you. So it's always exciting to be with people who feel like it's family in a way. So, so thank you for your attention yesterday. What I want to talk about today is kind of building on that. And I had mentioned when Tammy and I were talking about, what should I speak on, and what aspect of this idea of intergenerational preaching and teaching do you want me to touch on? There was the sense that we needed this bigger picture of these hallmarks yesterday, but Tammy said we really need some advice about how do we actually do this. And so again, I want to draw your attention to the workshop that I did last August for Intergenerate Australia, because in that workshop I talk about what I found with people who are actually at the front lines of this, and Tammy is one of them. Doing this work of forging new approaches to preaching and teaching that are truly intergenerational. And so check that out if you want some examples of what people are doing. What I'm going to do with all of you this morning, though, is talk about how we actually make this move. And so I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, great. Okay. So I want to talk about bring you back to my confirmation. I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church, and in Ontario there is a Roman Catholic school system, and that if you're part of, you do some of your sacraments through, and your sacramental prep through school as well. And so I was in grade 8, so I was about 13 or 14, and was confirmed in the Catholic Church, and a fellow student of mine played the violin at our confirmation ceremony, and I became enthralled with it. It was beautiful. It sounded wonderful, and it was such a meaningful moment. So I begged my parents to enroll me in violin lessons, and they gladly responded to my newfound interest. And very soon I went to my first lesson with Thomas, who was a Polish-born musician who drove to our city a few times each week to teach classes and to rehearse with our local orchestra. He lived about 4 or 5 hours away, though. Again, Northern Ontario, resources are limited, and we had to work together across long distances. So I was never one to turn down a challenge. And so after a year or so of the violin, I decided to try my hand at the viola as well. And as it turned out, Thomas was the principal violist in the Sudbury Symphony Orchestra. And after some months of teaching me how to play this violin's big sibling, he invited me to join the orchestra. So during the last 2 years of my secondary school years, Every Monday night, I rehearsed with this community orchestra, and I got to don a black suit and bow tie for the half dozen concerts that we performed each year. Now, I may have been the youngest member of this orchestra, but I was hardly a virtuoso. I struggled to practice regularly. I grew impatient with playing scales and arpeggios over and over and over again. And more than once, I faked my way through the difficult runs that I was supposed to learn for the orchestra's next performance. Sometimes the most that I could hope for was to make sure that I moved my bow in the same direction as everyone else, so that it at least appeared like I was keeping up and knew what I was doing. But Thomas didn't invite me to join the orchestra because I was a child prodigy. I was not. He did it because he more fully wanted to share his love of music with me. He wanted me to get caught up in a community of practice, to allow me to be swept off my feet by the power of this collective, an eclectic and unlikely group of people all gathered together for one reason: to make music. I share this as a metaphor because metaphors shape reality. We understand the world and we understand our place within the world by making meaning of it through something more concrete, something more tangible, something that incarnates infinite abstractness in finite materiality. I love the way David Mellett underscores the importance of metaphor in the vocation of Christian ministry. At its heart, he says, ministry requires a comfort, dexterity, and fascination with using words from one context to better understand another context. That's what metaphor is. Every time we talk about God, we use metaphor. All we have is metaphor to describe the indescribable. Now, a common guiding metaphor for understanding how the old and the young engage with one another is passing the baton. It's particularly apt now with the Olympics going on. Those who are older have been running the race of life, and the young stand poised, ready for them to hand off their legacy to the next generations. But this is a metaphor riddled with problems. Not only does it put the weight of the world on the shoulders of younger generations, as those who've completed their leg of the race get to now sit and watch from the sidelines, but these young people who now bear the full responsibility must passively stand and wait for their elders to hand them the baton. Now, in a recent book, Parker Palmer names these issues and proposes a new metaphor for intergenerativity. Let's stop talking about passing the baton to the young as we elders finish running our laps. Since most of us are more skilled at sitting than running, let's change the metaphor and invite young adults to join the orchestra. As we sit together, we can help them learn to play their instruments while they help us learn the music of the emerging world, which they can hear more clearly than we do. Together, we can compose something lovelier and more alive than the current cacophony, something in which dissonance has a place but does not dominate. Dissonance has a place but does not dominate. I love that final line. That was me in the orchestra. Dissonance, fumbling my way through the fast parts and trying to make sure that my bow movements didn't give away the fact that I had no idea what I was doing during the second movement of a particular symphony. And in reality, I wasn't alone, because the Sudbury Symphony Orchestra is a community orchestra. We invited professional musicians from all over the world to headline our concerts, but those of us who were part of the orchestra were volunteer musicians. I actually remember one time that a friend of mine a few years ahead of me was studying music at university, at the same university I would go to study music. And her trumpet instructor was our headline musician for a concert. And they had a lot of back and forths, I heard, because every piece of music he was saying he wanted to perform, our group had to say, we can't pull that one off. That's too difficult for us. There were few virtuosos in the group. experience and skill levels were all over the map. So I may have been at the lower end of the age spectrum, and I had a lot to learn from being part of this group, but so were other members who were older than I. There were adolescents and seniors who struggled to keep up, and there were 20-somethings and 70-somethings who led the way for the rest of us. With this metaphor in mind, today I want to offer some ideas for how we who are ministers, how we who are lay people, how we who are disciples, how we can transform the teaching and the preaching practices of our congregations. And so I want to share 4 broad ideas. Focus on a point of departure, find allies, fail gloriously and learn from it, and fly high. Now, I love new ideas. I love trying new things. It's why I'm a practical theologian. Being part of this diverse and this interdisciplinary field of study that lives in the space between the church and the academy gives me opportunities to see what new things are on the horizon and to forge my own experimentations in ministry. When I learn about a new practice, I can't wait to try it out for myself and see what happens. When I encounter a new idea, I love letting it swirl together within my existing thoughts and see what ideas emerge as a result. But the problem with this sort of living is that it becomes fairly easy to jump into an idea or try out a new experience about thinking where I'm coming from in order to arrive at that new place. Whether serving as a pastor at a congregation or as a professor at a seminary, as much as I wanted to try something new with congregants and students, I often have to slow down and remind myself where we are as a community. Change does not happen by zooming forward to the next and the new. It involves intentionally moving forward one small step at a time. This slow and steady approach to change within the church is even more important when we're dealing with practices that carry significant liturgical and theological weight. And the preaching ministry of the church is one of those matters. Because of the central place that preaching occupies in the life of the church, a place that's so central that all of our pews and our space have been arranged. We talked about before we started officially today. All of our pews have been arranged because of how important preaching is, especially in Protestantism. Because of this central place, the sermon or the homily is often seen as untouchable. That one aspect of worship that we can't change. It's a sacred practice, and rightly so, but it's one that's seen as far too sacred to mess around with. Now, changing the norms of Christian preaching is not a technical fix that can be accomplished with a little know-how and a lot of elbow grease. It's what Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky call an adaptive change. You've probably heard this before, the difference between an adaptive change and a technical fix. They write about organizational change in the business world, but it's just important for pastoral leaders. And actually, Ron Heifetz knows this and does some work with congregations as well. We're not talking here about conventional office politics, they write. We're thinking about the high stakes risk you face whenever you try to lead an organization through a difficult but necessary change. The risks during such times are especially high because change that truly transforms an organization, be it a multi-billion-dollar company or a 10-person sales team, it demands that people give up things they hold dear, daily habits, loyalties, ways of thinking. And in return for these sacrifices, they may be offered nothing more than the possibility of a better future. These words remind us that approaches to intergenerational preaching and teaching are not simply alternative methods for offering the gospel. They call the church to rethink what it means to interpret and to speak and to experience the gospel at so deep a level that they require sacrifices on the part of the parishioner and the pastor. This adaptive change requires that we give up practices for offering and receiving the message of the gospel that we hold dear and that have been part of our common way of life for many, many years. So as you think about how to move toward intergenerational preaching in your own context, it's helpful to remember that human beings learn best when they work with an idea or practice that's not so easy that they can do it by themselves. That's not where learning happens. And not so difficult that they can't accomplish it even with the help of a mentor or someone more experienced. That's also not where learning happens. The sweet spot for growth is what Lev Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development. It's that area between these two poles. It's the space where someone is stretched to do something new that they cannot do by themselves, but that they can do with the assistance of others. As a pastor or as a lay advocate who's seeking ways to teach and preach in all age contexts, you are a more experienced peer for your congregation. You are a resident expert by virtue of being here today. And while it's vital to push our boundaries of preaching and stretch our imaginations and the imaginations of our faith communities, we cannot go so far that they snap and they fall apart around us. So here are 3 ideas to keep in mind as you begin. First, it can be useful to introduce your congregation to just a few aspects of intergenerational preaching and teaching, especially if that shift to all age ministry is relatively new for you or for your context, or maybe you anticipate some resistance by intergenerating the pulpit. It's helpful to start with a small intergenerational practice, like asking a turn to your neighbor question in the middle of a sermon, or incorporating into your messages some ideas that are shared by people of different ages. Like, I was talking to Tammy, who we all know is one of our 6-year-olds in our church. And she was telling me this, and that reminded me of our sermon and our gospel for today. Something like that. You're incorporating into your messages ideas shared by people of different ages. And then build on these small steps in incremental ways. Second, not every part of any sermon needs to be intergenerational. Think about how you can transform 1 or 2 elements of your message, whether it's the preparation by having intergenerational small groups discuss a passage that you're going to preach on in a few days, whether you do something during the delivery, or maybe even by asking for feedback. And I don't mean here the feedback of the, pre-COVID handshake at the door, good sermon, pastor, when you caught them sleeping 30 minutes earlier. For the record, a colleague of mine says you should take it as a compliment if someone sleeps during your sermon. It means they're comfortable enough with you that they can just relax that much. And sometimes that's what people need. Anyway, think about how you can transform the preparation, the delivery, or some sort of feedback so that 1 or 2 aspects are reflective of generational diversity. And finally, it may be prudent to introduce your congregation to practices of intergenerational preaching and teaching through a special event rather than a Sunday worship service. Because the main Sunday service is often carries a particular weight. And so we can start with those peripheral services. I have friends who do things on Good Friday or on an anniversary Sunday to change things up a little bit, because people are already expecting this is going to be a little different than a normal Sunday service. So you might create a one-off Sunday evening intergenerational worship event. You might build on a weekly all-age program that's already in place, or you could capitalize on a special celebration like Epiphany or World Communion Sunday, or even a wedding, by making the message at this one service a message for all ages. These sorts of services and celebrations offer unique opportunities for us to preach outside the box and push people into new ways of hearing and experiencing the gospel. So that's the first big idea. Focus on a point of departure. It's not easy to try new things, and it's more difficult to try new things in front of a crowd. And so it's no wonder then that some leaders might get squeamish when faced with a question about exploring alternative approaches to preaching. What if it doesn't go well? What if the message flops? What do I do if no one accepts my invitation to answer a question that isn't a rhetorical question, a question I actually want people to shout answers for? I've been in this situation more than a few times. And a more recent instance was when I took a page from Doug Paget's style of preaching, and I sought to incorporate a moment of conversation into a sermon that I offered during an ecumenical chapel service at Atlanta School of Theology, where I teach. I started with a 5-minute monologue that provided some contextual information to one of the readings in our lectionary for that day. And I made some preliminary connections between the scripture and our contemporary context. And then I punted the homily to the community. And I asked everyone who was gathered that day to meet together in small groups for a few minutes and respond to a question that I provided. The process wrapped up with another moment for us to gather as a large group and debrief. And I invited everyone who was willing to share their reflections and share what came up in their small group discussions. At first, everyone seemed willing to try this out. They moved their chairs into small circles. I'm very glad that we had recently replaced our clunky pews with soft individual chairs that were movable. And the chapel gradually filled with voices engaging with the question that I offered. But everything changed when I invited people to share their thoughts with the whole community. Despite the fact that we are all used to sharing, and believe me, my students are used to sharing their opinions at meetings and in classes, and we are used to discussing difficult texts and disagreeing respectfully. But the invitation to do that as part of a collaborative sermon went unanswered at first. All I could do was stand at the front and stare out into the congregation and pray that someone would break the awkward silence. And thankfully, another faculty member broke the ice and shared some of her thoughts. And by doing that, she seemed to permit and encourage others to follow in turn. This experience reminds me of the importance of allies when experimenting with something new. Todd Bolsinger reminds us that an ally may not be our friend. They might be our friend, but we might not like that ally at all. But what's more important is that that ally is convinced of the mission and is committed to seeing it fulfilled. When a pastor wishes to invite a congregation to do something new during a liturgical moment that's usually reserved for a monological sermon, it's wise to have an ally or two planted in the crowd. If you're going to ask someone to turn and talk to their neighbor, or invite everyone to walk around the room choosing names for God, it's assuring to know that there's at least one person in the community who's willing to break the ice for everyone else. Now, enlisting a cohort of change makers begins with just one or two people. So as you're planning how you're going to invite people to interact with the gospel during an upcoming intergenerational message, send a text message or make a phone call or email someone. Email a few people and ask them if they will be willing to be the first person to accept the invitation to do something, to say something that you're going to be offering during the message, and ask them to do it even if no one else seems keen to join in. Whether you're enlisting a child or a teenager, a middle-aged adult, or a senior, it only takes one or two people to lead the way for everyone else. Changing church practices to make them intergenerational challenges the status quo because it leads the community into a new land and into wilderness experiences. The result can be uncertainty, discomfort, grief, anxiety, and we need to attend to these emotions. One practitioner who shared their approaches to intergenerational preaching in the online questionnaire I talked about yesterday, this person stated that some parishioners said, "It doesn't feel like church." Others found that congregants were reluctant, especially the first few times. But they also said that allies helped the community to overcome any hesitancy that was happening in the church. And it opened the door to even more innovative experimentations with intergenerational teaching and preaching. One person said, "The resistance is only early and brief. Most people welcome it when they see that they survived the change." when asking congregants to walk with you into a new place, having an ally or two who are willing to step into the wilderness before anyone else, it lets everyone know that the future might be uncertain, but it's worth pursuing. Now, I cannot move forward without saying that we are a community of allies right here. And I've been talking about finding allies in your faith community. But it is important to find allies outside of your faith community as well. Every one of us, this would be so much more powerful if we were in the same room. And I know some of you are. But every one of us gathered here today, we are allies to one another. So find your allies in your congregation or your parish, and find and connect with your allies outside as well. But find your allies. Now, one of the reasons that allies matter is because there's no guarantee of success when we experiment with anything new, especially new approaches to preaching. Am I going to come across as confident when I lead my church into something new? I've asked myself that. What happens if we run out of time? Are people even going to accept the invitation that I'm offering them to do things together? What if this whole thing blows up in my face? These are real, these are important questions that we need to consider as we muster the courage to try new things. Now, rather than use these worries as excuses to maintain the status quo, we can face our fears and we can boldly name the fact that our experiments with intergenerational preaching and teaching are just that. They're experiments. Some of them are going to end up being more fruitful than others. Some of them might result in one or two epic fails. But like scientific experimentation, all results are valid. Successes are valid, failures are valid. What matters is not whether or not our efforts take off or whether they fall flat. What matters is what's learned through the process and the ongoing journey of cultivating a new kind of homiletical culture within your congregation, a new way of preaching. Now, a particular challenge with preaching and teaching is that we rely on practices that are carried out in front of the congregation. The public nature of Christian proclamation means that our failures and our successes are on full display for everyone to see. And unlike things that happen studying for a sermon or writing a curriculum, it happens in real time in front of everyone. It's possible to actually capitalize on this fact, though, and be explicit about what you're trying to do. Pastors and lay leaders who are wishing to introduce their communities to intergenerational preaching, we can just be upfront and let our people know that there are no guarantees of positive results for what we're about to do. We can name the fact that we are making things up as we go along, and that a particular approach is experimental, it's preliminary, it's open for ongoing revision. And we can extend a hand and invite everyone in the community to come along for the ride and see what happens. Now, the all too real possibility of failure is crucial for any sort of intergenerational work. And I think we in the church need to take a cue from the hosts of the Discovery Channel Mythbusters, whose entertaining experiments over the years led them to adopt an important motto: failure is always an option. Let us open wide the doors to innovation and bravely walk through them with our faith communities, together knowing that the journey toward flight involves a lot of crashing and burning along the way. We're all going to face our share of missteps, of mistakes, and epic failures. And we can thank God that with each one comes an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to improve what we are doing to proclaim a gospel for all ages. If failure is always an option, it's imperative to pause and recognize those moments when things go well. The ideas shared during this conference may help you get off to a good start, but there are no formulas to follow to ensure successful experimentation with anything intergenerational. Practitioners of intergenerational preaching and teaching that I've met over the years, they have had their share of flops. But through creativity and collaboration and a lot of perseverance, they have had life-changing moments when, for some reason, everything falls into place in just the right way, and everyone in the community, old and young alike, join together in making the gospel known that day. And in these moments, when they happen, it is worth celebrating what God has done through the congregation. The successes that we might encounter on our journeys with intergenerational preaching and teaching and any kind of intergenerational ministry are often wonderfully unforeseeable. I recall many times when I've invited a congregation to try something new together, and it ends up feeling like I'm getting a lot of resistance in return. But then in some sort of serendipitous way, everything comes together at the end. The metaphorical fog in the room lifts, and the congregation bands together in the experiment, and we all leave feeling like God was present in that wonderfully chaotic moment. What seemed to be on a crash course ended up resulting in something that flew high. Success comes in unexpected ways and at unexpected times, much like God. And so keep open to the work of the Spirit, no matter how far into the weeds it feels like you're moving. Anything intergenerational, especially preaching, because of the sacred place it has, the central place it has within our worship lives, it's not for the faint of heart. It takes conviction to wrestle with unspoken assumptions and long-held norms for proclaiming the gospel, and it takes courage to imagine what new practices could be on the horizon. It takes courage to stand in front of a congregation, especially one that pays you to be there week in and week out, and reach out your hand and ask them for their trust. It takes fortitude to lead a parish to a new experience with no promises for positive results. And it takes trust and faith for members of your community to join you on the journey. So when your church enters the brave new world of intergenerational preaching, don't forget to celebrate with them. Even when things don't quite go as expected, members need a moment to celebrate their new identity even before they fully understand its implications. Thank your parish for their faith in you. Affirm their faith in one another as co-preachers, and celebrate the faith in God that you've all demonstrated as you walked hand in hand into a new space together. Focus, find, fail, fly. No matter what your theological tradition is or your geographic location, whether your church is small or large or somewhere in between, whether your parish consists of children, youth, and adults of every age, or if it's mostly a graying congregation, these 4 traits can help you give intergenerational preaching a go. Regardless of the form it takes, preaching and teaching does not happen alone. Will Willimon reminds us that it's a communal activity. When we interpret and we speak and we experience the gospel together, we remember that we cannot do this work alone. When we gather as a community of faith, God is joining us and infusing the words that we speak and the actions that we are taking with divine power, so that through the work of the Spirit, our words and our actions become transformative, even becoming the very words and actions of Jesus. I really have not tried to mince words in this presentation, because I know that transforming how the gospel is preached and how it's taught in our congregations is fraught with difficulty. Sometimes it feels like we are going it alone, especially when we are not surrounded with communities like we're together, like we have together right now. Other times we might want to throw in the towel. Jesus never promised us that that we're going to get the results we seek when we choose to follow him. We may upset some long-standing parishioners. We might confuse those who are visiting our church for the first time. We might even see declining attendance as some people choose to leave and find a church with more traditional approaches to ministry, to worship, and to preaching. And that's okay. Stay focused on small steps, find your allies, learn from the epic failures that you and your congregation are going to encounter along the way. And when things take off and really get flying, celebrate it together. We have a difficult task in front of us. This is epic change. This is not easy work. And so I can think of no better way to end my time with you than to share the wise words that Phyllis Tickle offered to those of us who gathered in Nashville for the 2014 Faith Forward Conference, only a year before her death. She said to us, "I do not envy your job, but I do most surely pray for you. In so many ways, the next 4 centuries of Christianity rest in your hands. Not just in what you do with your congregants and their children, but how you can make that spread out into the wider world of the unchurched and the no longer churched. The next 4 centuries of Christianity are in our hands. May God bless you in the radical work of intergenerating the church. It is not easy, but it surely is faithful."
Wow, David, powerful, absolutely powerful. Especially that last quote, next 4 centuries in our hands. Oh, yeah. Lots to think about there. And again, a very punchy, powerful presentation of the way to go. And thank you for that. So much to think about right now, which is what we're going to do. I'll put you into rooms now, into chat rooms of groups of 6 or 7 to think about 2 questions that Dave has put together, which I'll put into the chat shortly, and I'll broadcast into your rooms. Just to mull over what David has brought to the table today. So I think Louise and John are going to work on that right now to get you into chat rooms, and we'll see you soon. Those 2 questions I'll broadcast into your rooms and put into the chat right now.
I loved the fact that he talked about not only the importance of being together and have those communities of practice, but even using the concept of allies, that we're both, that we're not only there are allies within your community, but also allies across the kingdom, really. And I know that for me, the last 12 months, since last Intergenerate to this Intergenerate, we were a part of, or I've been a part of 2 communities of practice that formed from last Intergenerate, and we met 5 times throughout the year. And I just found that, again, that was just this beautiful feeling of community and like-minded people, that kind of the eclectic group of people that were all kind of centered around this one purpose. And for me, that was really valuable. So I suppose what I'm trying to encourage you, and I know that David has said the same this morning, is that we can't do this alone. We need to do this together, and there's lots of ways to do that together. And I would encourage you to consider finding allies and finding communities of practice. And I am just going to share my screen, that if you felt like that was something that you would like to do within the community of Intergenerate Australia and beyond, then if you go to, and I put the link in the chat, actually it's a bit further up. I think some people were been writing some stuff, but it's there. And there was a couple of there's some feedback from some of the people that were just recently in it that I've put up there. One of the Uniting Minister, who said, "Intergenerational ministry is tough, and being a part of a group has inspired me. The group encouraged me through their stories and sharing of resources. Highly recommend, one of the best uses of my time." And then someone from New Zealand who said, "I appreciate the opportunity to hear the stories of others who were from very different contexts to my own. We were a diverse group from different countries, denominations, and types of faith communities. It was rewarding to journey together as we shared the highs and lows of our experiences and explore what intergenerational church could look like. I always finished our sessions feeling both challenged and encouraged. And then, of course, from the UK, it's been enriching to hear the experiences of others in different contexts around the world, and sustaining to be a part of a group of people all committed to finding ways towards embedding intergenerational ministry and the mission in the church. I have appreciated the regular contact and fellowship we developed. So, again, not just my words, not even Dave's words, that's people's that have actually been a part of it. And if you want or you're interested in applying to see whether you would like to be a part of something that we're going to try to kick off maybe around August this year, then this is the link. And you 5 times a year, it's a commitment. It's $50 per session, $250 for the whole year. 10 to 12 people all over. I try to pick people that are quite diverse, so we've got these kind of really great stories and great sharing and great feelings across denominations, sizes and journeys. And again, I just think it's just one way to stay connected and to find those allies to do what David has said and what has been said in these refers, that it is not an easy journey, but one step at a time we need to do this together. So really, really encourage you to consider that, or consider some kind of connection within your denomination or within your space, and just continue these conversations.